Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to Literally Everything. Today we're going to talk about a movie that's been getting a lot of praise recently, just debuted on Netflix today, and that's Maestro. And I'm somebody that doesn't necessarily agree with a lot of this praise. Not that I hate it, I just think it falls somewhere in the middle. But let's talk about some of that. So I want to start with some of the positives, and there are two really big positives in Maestro, and I think both of those are the lead performances. It's Bradley Cooper and Carrie Mulligan. Both of them really kind of put this on their backs and just have these really great scene stealing performances in every single scene that they're in, which is every scene. It really focuses on both of them, and it's throughout the years, like starting when they're really young and going through the rest of their life. And it's a really great job of kind of having different voices and mannerisms and just kind of personalities, like slightly different personalities in each of these kind of eras. And with that, they're able to just kind of really ground this whole film, and just make you feel exactly what that character's feeling in those moments. I also want to say the cinematography is pretty great too. This is kind of going for like, if anybody saw Steve Jobs, I don't know, it's got to be like 10 years ago at this point almost. But the one with Michael Fassbender that was directed by Danny Boyle, where you've kind of got these different eras and they're switching from like 16 millimeter film to 32 and digital and, so on. And this does kind of the same thing where we're starting off with one style, transitioning to another, kind of moving our way up with the times. And I thought that really worked too. And now we're going to start talking about some of the negatives here. And I think that really starts and ends with the direction. It just seems really confused to me. And a lot of that stems from their kind of inability to hone in on the story that they're telling. And I think they're inadvertently telling a story that is actually pretty interesting, which is the story of Leonard the husband. And just kind of having this closeted sexuality, trying to keep it from people, but also not being able to kind of hold back on that part of himself. But there are scenes throughout this entire film that seem to insinuate that it thinks this is about Leonard Bernstein, the musician, whether that's from, having these really great scenes about their marriage that just end with the climax of him in like a big 10-minute slow motion conducting sequence that just kind of like, yeah, it's cool, but it's not really what this has been about. And just kind of, even the title of the film is Maestro. And then they'll have these big, arguments where they start yelling about Carrie Mulligan will start yelling about oh, you feel so much pressure from your music and that's why you act like this and blah, blah, blah. But to me, it's just when did we ever see that? When did we ever see the pressure from the music? When did we ever see him making music? When did we ever really see anything to do with the music other than a few scenes of him conducting? Because for me, I went into Maestro not really knowing much about Leonard Bernstein other than that he had written the music for West Side Story. And I left Maestro not really knowing much about Leonard Bernstein, as a musician at least, other than the fact that he wrote West Side Story. There are things that, they'll mention in passing, like, oh, you've just written West Side Story, or like, oh, you've just written this other thing. But you never see him do those things. You never see the pressure of making those things, the kind of aftershocks of that. You just kind of skip through all of it and you get the marriage story, which again is the more interesting story, I think. It's just that the movie seems to keep coming back and thinking that it's about the music, and it's really never about the music. And I think that also kind of shines through in one scene towards the beginning, where this whole thing really, before and after this one scene, is this really kind of grounded, realistic portrayal of these two real people. And then suddenly they're on stage somewhere, and there's this almost ethereal, dream-like dance sequence. And I started thinking oh, is this what it's going to be from now on? But then no, it wasn't. It just kind of came out of nowhere because again, it just seemed like it thought it was more about the music than it really was. And that's what's confusing to me, because I was really invested in the story of Leonard the husband and his marriage and how it was working. I just didn't necessarily think that the movie thought that's the story it was telling. And every time I started to get invested in something, it would go back to the music part, which really didn't have much to do with anything. And even at the end, we end on another scene of him teaching music, and it's just when did we ever get to this point? There's just so little about him as a musician in it, and they're ending it with Leonard the musician, and I just don't think that's what the story was. And obviously when there are just random scenes kind of thrown in throughout that don't do much for the story and don't do a lot for the characters as a whole, it starts to feel really long. It's definitely one of those things where if you saw it in a theater like I did, you start to wonder like, how long has this been happening? How much is left? Because you start to lose track of not just time, but really just the movie as a whole. Like, I just found myself so lost and not knowing what we were trying to do in some of these moments that I couldn't even tell, like, are we halfway through the movie? Is it almost over? Are we still in the first half? Like, I have no idea, because just the way things were moving didn't make any logical sense to me. And like I said, I did really love everything kind of revolving around this like broken but still loving marriage. I just felt like the film itself didn't know that it was focusing on that and could have spent a lot more time hitting on some of those things, and honestly also cut out some of the runtime. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you're a musical theater person, or you just like Leonard Bernstein, I think you'll like it. If you're like an acting person and you just want to see two really great kind of powerhouse performances, I think you'll like it. But as a whole, outside of those kind of two things, it just doesn't work for me on a lot of levels. So yeah, like I said, I don't love it. I don't hate it. I think it's kind of a soft 3 out of 5 stars for me. But I know a lot of people disagree with me. And if you're one of those people, feel free to let me know in the comments. Or if you felt the same way too, definitely let me know in the comments. I always hate feeling like I'm alone whenever I'm just disagreeing with, kind of the mass population on a movie like this. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Maestro. So like I said, feel free to leave a comment, or if you like this content and you want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe.